Welcome to Red Beard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and today we're talking about a topic that may make you uncomfortable because as we talk through what we're talking about today, you may say, I'm not sure I'm in the position that I want to be in regards to my financial numbers. But let me give you two pieces of assurance. The first one is I worked side by side with the person I'm interviewing today for over a year, and I can tell you she is both gentle and also really, really accurate. So she's going to be very nice in how she helps us understand what numbers we ought to be tracking in our business. And especially if we're not tracking all of them and you might start to feel, I don't know. Let me tell you, Jen's a nice person. But second, let me tell you what one of her clients said about her. This client said, Jen elevated our financial management and wealth potential. She transitioned our finances from a bootstrapping small business to a multi-million-dollar business. We're no longer hoping on a wing and prayer that there's enough cash in the bank to pay our bills and our team. We now have a solid plan to make smart spending choices. Now, answer for yourself, folks. Does that sound like your current financial structure? And it's okay. I'm not in the room with you. You can answer honestly. If any of you say, I'm not there, but I'd like to get there, this is the episode for you, and this is the person for you. Welcome to the show, Jen Bro.
Hey there, Brian. Thank you so much for having me on the show today. I'm excited to be here and to make numbers fun and frankly make them sexy so that we want to play with them and use them to help us grow and scale and really enjoy our businesses so much more.
Now, finding numbers fun is an interesting idea. Did you know that my mom is known as the CPA who likes to play?
I did not know that.
I did not allude to that when we first met. So my mother teaches bankers how to make better loans by learning tax return analysis and financial statements analysis, which most of the listeners would hear that and go, what? Well, be assured, most lenders who hear that also go, that doesn't sound fun. But when you take the right approach and you understand the meaning behind what you're doing, like my mom is helping lenders make good loans, which helps make sure the right people get home loans they can really afford and the right businesses get loans that they can really afford to do the right work, that these numbers that she plays with really underpin a healthy lending economy that gets the right people money to go pursue their dreams. So even though there's a lot of numbers that are maybe in the way, it's in this pursuit of this long-term passion. And I got to see, Jen, as we work side by side on our mutual client, you use numbers to really help this client, help a lot of people pursue their passions. And so I'm really excited to hear your passionate approach towards this. And we talked about these 5 numbers every entrepreneur must know. So before we dive into these specific 5 ones, because you've worked with a lot of people who don't have these numbers in place, and I want to hear from you those soothing words that are going to help people go, okay, no need to hyperventilate. If you don't have all these in place, give us a lifeline here, Jen, before we dive into the 5 specific numbers.
Absolutely. So number 1, you're not alone. There's this thing called the entrepreneur journey, and everybody's learning and growing as they're moving their way along, increasing their dollars every year. And most clients I work with started at the kitchen table, and they grew an amazing business, having awesome impact on millions of people. But then something happens around that, 1 million mark where they start looking at, what are these numbers? What do I need to know? The biggest question I get is, can you please help me ask the questions I don't know I'm supposed to be asking? And so I'm kind of known as I don't know what I don't know, kind of a financial executive coach in the CFO space, because it's not only about getting the numbers that you need to know, but it's about really that entrepreneurial expansion of what's the next thing I need to learn? What's the next thing I need to learn? I mean, you know this, Brian, like as you go along every year in your entrepreneur journey, there's more and more that you realize you didn't know, and that's okay. We're not supposed to know everything overnight. So long story short, you're in good hands. You are where you are. You're hearing this now because it's time. So it's all good. Be gentle with yourself. The other thing I'd really like to say is, I love working with clients who it's all about legacy. It is about leaving a legacy that has impacted the planet and humanity in some way. It's not just about, putting bigger numbers into their pocketbooks or buying more homes. Not that those things aren't an organic byproduct, but I love working on, this bigger legacy that's bigger than the person themselves. And so I get really excited about that in terms of these are the 5 numbers that every entrepreneur must know.
I love the generational viewpoint because if any of these numbers are uncomfortable to think about the process of how you're going to get them and what they're going to tell you when you actually have them in front of you, you can compare that to what's the generational benefit, like the benefit to your clients' children or your customers' children
Yeah.
and their children. And if you look at the benefit of whatever you're selling, assuming you're selling something virtuous, then you can say, okay, well, I might not want to go gather this particular number because I'm afraid of what it might tell me about the health of my business. But compared to what it's paying off by sustaining my business and building a healthy business, I can help a lot more people have significant generational positive impacts. So I should just be an adult and go do it because it's worth it for the children of my clients.
Amen. Amen.
Let's start off. You said there's 5 numbers every entrepreneur should know. What's the first one? What's the big one?
The first one is your profit centers. That sounds like, ooh, what does that actually mean? And I walk into a lot of engagements and people aren't sure what profit they're making on the different product mix that they're selling out there, whether it's a service, whether it's an actual product. And so it's really important to know what are your profit margins on each of your profit centers.
Now, let's take a business where there is an expert and they're selling stuff. They're selling a common thing would be an online course of some kind plus some one-on-one coaching.
Mhm.
And then there's a bunch of subscriptions and a bunch of tech costs, and maybe there's some contractor costs. And for everybody, when they start off, okay, there's this bucket of costs, there's this bucket of incoming money, and then I have some left over afterwards, and that's my profit.
Mhm.
And the next level is, and then I pay myself whatever my salary is, and then I have some profit left over. How do we transition from that model, which is almost everyone,
Right.
into actually assigning costs to individual products and services?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the situation. Most people at this stage of the entrepreneurial game, they're getting their tax return done and they see how much they made. And by that time, the year is long past due and you're not sure what actually was profitable in there. So I really help people pick that apart. So let me give you a specific example. So I have a client, they have 2 masterminds, a level 1 and a level 2. So, for example, when they came to me, they thought that their level 2 was actually their biggest moneymaker. When we started looking at the revenue and then the costs, the hard costs that go into selling those masterminds, caring for the people in the masterminds, all of the wrap up, all of the tech, we actually found out that level 2 was not more profitable. It was actually level 1 that was more profitable. And when we realized that, we had to start asking ourselves whether level 2 needed to be retooled, whether we were going to continue it, whether we were going to scale down the advertising dollars. All these questions start happening about strategy, how you can take the same amount of money that, for example, you're investing in your Facebook ads and actually make more because you have insights into those profit centers. And so what we did was we saw that while level 2, was some good bread and butter, level 1, the margins were much, much higher. Let's say, for example, we were doing 50% margins versus, 10% margins on the mastermind level 2. And so that got us thinking, well, why don't we just throw more money into lead generation for level 1? And we know instead of getting 10% back, we're going to get 50% back, for example.
Let me put some numbers here, some dollar figures. So I'm going to give an example, Jen, and you can update this example.
Okay.
Let's imagine we have a $200,000 a year business. 100,000 comes from one thing we sell. Let's say it's the level 1 mastermind, and 100,000 comes from the second one. But maybe the first one, we're making 50% back because we do it in a group fashion, and maybe we spend 50,000 on ad costs and infrastructure. But then the level 2 one, we make $100,000, yes, but we also have to hire 3 staff people to manage it. And there's a lot of extra expenses. So we're actually only making 5,000 a year. So in this example, you're making half profit on your first one, and you're only making 5% on your second. And so you're saying that you should look at how you can change what you're doing with the level 2, maybe even killing it off. Because if you can do twice as much business at level 1, you're adding another 50,000 to your bottom line, whereas you have to 10x your level 2 to make another $50,000. Do I have those numbers right?
Exactly. Exactly. So it really helps you to see what strategy to move forward, what's working, what could be worked better, and what needs to be retooled in the business.
I love those fundamental questions. And folks, that's why I've referred more than one person to Jen when I hear Jen-like questions where I think, okay, this person needs to understand at a deeper level their numbers. And then I say, okay, you have a Jen question, so let me get her email address. Uh, it's just there's these gen level questions where I do all kinds of basic financial analysis. Like the example I just gave, I'm good to go on that. But you take it many levels deeper, and I've gotten to see you in action do it. So if even the example we just gave folks, if that sounds like you're not totally sure about where your profit centers are, jenbro.com is the website, jenbro.com. And that applies for any of these 5 numbers. If you're not totally sure and you think that there might be a lot of money if you had more clarity, then go reach out to Jen. Definitely tell her I said hi. And you can go have someone take apart your numbers at a much deeper level than most, I guess I would say, less sophisticated on the financial side business analysts like myself.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Jen. I've loved seeing you in action and see you take your level of analysis deeper and on that profit centers. The example I just gave is an all too real example where we don't actually know. And
Yep.
you might think, man, my level 2, it's really my top level service, and I should just go try to grow that. If I can just double that, I'll be set.
Yep.
And that same amount of energy, if I could grow level 1 instead and double that, you're talking 10x different in returns of $5,000 additional profit versus $50,000 additional profit. And that will change your whole world
Yep.
to have an additional $45,000 extra in this next year.
Absolutely.
And here's the thing. I went to business school. We don't learn these things. I got my bachelor's in business, right? We learned some good stuff, but the basic question of how do you know where your money's coming from?
Yeah.
There's no school for that.
Yep.
We just sort of do stuff. And as long as we don't go bankrupt, we think we're doing good. But taking it to that next level, I just love it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about number 2. What is your number 2 number that every entrepreneur should know?
Your cash runway, and specifically your cash runway for the next 3 months. Okay, so you may be asking, what does cash runway mean? That means, what does it look like, cash in, cash out, for the next 3 months? In terms of, for example, how much cash do you burn through each month to operate your business? What are your fixed costs every month that you know are going to be going out the door? And then what is your cash coming in that you, on average, if you have a typical quarter, if you're a seasonal business, and you can lay these numbers out and look at your cash runway so that you know that you can stay solvent in your business, meaning you can meet all of your expenses, you can meet all your debt payments, all that sort of stuff. And you also can see then how much extra you have so that you can perhaps invest in, a new tech piece that you may want in your business, or perhaps you want to pay down some debt. So by seeing your cash runway, you can see 3 months in advance where you're at, and it allows you to make very different decisions than if you were to try to do that after the fact.
So let's put some specific numbers here. Let's say that my cost of labor is $10,000 a month. So that's, let's say, salary for me plus some contractors. And let's say it's another $10,000 a month on advertising. And let's say tech cost $5,000. So I $25,000 is leaving each month. And then let's say I'm making $50,000 between my membership and my private coaching and maybe some retreats or whatever. So then in that case, that's great because the cash runway is positive, making $25,000 a month. But then on the other hand, what you're saying is, let's say we have the same costs, but maybe next month something happens and now my income is, instead of 50,000, okay, now it's down to 20,000.
Right.
By looking at this cash runway, we can say, okay, well, we're actually losing 5,000 a month. Okay, well, how much is saved in the business? If it's less than 15,000, then we have less than 3 months to figure this out.
Yep, exactly.
If it's more than 15,000, we have more than 3 months.
Right.
But we can't know unless we measure.
Exactly. So you would sort of visualize this. You can do it old school on a spreadsheet. And then there's more sophisticated apps out there, which are actually very affordable, that will map this out for you. And they provide very pretty infographics. But basically, it shows you a timeline. Today you have, on the day of this recording, let's say you have $100,000 in the bank. You know you're going to be spending $25,000 this month. That puts you at $75,000 left in cash. You know you're going to be getting $50,000 in, so that puts your balance back up at $125,000. And so you can start to see where the pattern is, and it allows you to see when there's excess cash. You can do cool new stuff with that. For example, if you've been wanting to throw more money into lead generation, or if you want to hire a better copywriter, or whatever it is you want to do. You don't know if you can afford to do that if you can't see the cash runway and that you can afford to do those things.
I find the idea of cash runway so important that I do this in my personal life with my personal finances, where I look at, okay, if from today I stopped making any money, the business completely fell apart for whatever reason.
Right.
Okay, how long do I have in terms of my cash? How long in terms of near cash assets? How long in terms of credit cards that I could put debt on,
Yep.
etc. And just say, okay, well, from today, if zero money came in, I have this many months. Okay, and if what if only half of my expected revenue came in? So this is really where the two can mesh together, right?
Yep.
If you're an entrepreneur, where okay, well, if my cash runway right now, let's say it's positive, 10,000 a month, more a month coming in than going out every month, great. Then my personal runway is pretty darn good. If the business is just breaking even, then you can say, okay, well, what if half of your revenue went away? You can compare that to your personal life. So you have your how long do I have in the business before things get uncomfortable and then critical?
Yeah.
Same thing with personal life. I just love this idea, and it's also nice for avoiding that complacency, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Has anyone here ever had a lot of money for whatever reason? Like you just had a big client or you just made a big project. You're like, oh man, I'm doing great. Well, okay, that's nice. What's your cash runway?
Right.
Is your cash runway normally 3 months and now it's 7 months? That's wonderful. What can you do to keep it at 7 months or to push it to 12 months?
Exactly.
It sort of takes away the moral victory of, okay, you made a windfall. Good for you. Now, what's your cash runway? Because there's always a number of months or years. And one way of looking at freedom is if your cash runway is longer than you plan on living, you're free. And so we can boil it down. Most businesses don't have that kind of cash runway, right?
Yeah.
But we can say, okay, well, maybe your goal is 12 months in your business. If you have 12 months, that means if you make no revenue starting today, but you still have all the same costs, in 12 months, your business croaks. Okay, now you know. And now you can take that kind of action.
Exactly. And it really allows you to stay ahead of the game because the economic conditions are always shifting, people are always shifting. And so if you're ahead of the game and you can see before things actually start to happen, you're already way ahead of the game and you're going to reduce your risk a lot by doing so. And it doesn't matter if you're super successful right now and you have a ton of cash in the bank and you've got a lot of great leads coming in, or if you're sort of like, equaling out every month, your expenses are equal to your revenue, or if you're even on the other side of that spectrum where expenses are more than cash coming in. And having the cash runway works for anybody in any of those situations, regardless, if that makes sense.
Well, and it helps answer the questions about where and when can you invest. Like everyone listening, ask yourself, could you afford to spend an additional $10,000 on ads next month?
Right.
Whether your answer is yes or no, that's partly based on where's your actual cash runway position and how would this impact that? Well, let's say 5,000 more in ads next month, but starting to spend that every month. If you know your cash runway, then you can say, okay, well, my current cash runway is 6 months. If I start spending that on ads, it's going to change to over the long haul, more like 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
How do I feel about that?
Right.
And you can use that. Okay, well, I'm going to have substantially less, but then substantially less protection, but then I have the chance on really making an investment that right now might be the time to go put another 5K a month into ads. So that number is just so fantastic. Let's dive into the next one. What's the third number that all entrepreneurs should know?
Your top 3 to 5 ongoing expenses. Those are the ones that somebody in your team should be delivering to you every week. And so with the people I work with, generally that's labor is one of the largest expenses, advertising, their tech stack, and then any cost of goods sold. Let's start with cost of labor. I think that is generally one of the most highest ongoing expenses that gets missed by entrepreneurs as they're growing and scaling their companies. So cost of labor, the best way to think about that is as a percentage of your revenue. So think about it this way. Does it cost you $2 in labor to generate $5 in revenue? If it does, that means that 40% of your revenue is going to labor, and that's very high. A business will have a difficult time sustaining solvency if their labor rate is at 40% of their revenue. Now, sometimes for a short period, companies will have to do that because they're scaling up and they're investing in labor ahead of getting the sales returns. And that's okay as long as it's planned for in your cash runway, wink, wink. But that's really important, cost of labor. If you don't know how much it takes of labor, your team, to generate a dollar of revenue in your company, you're walking blind into, a potential bee's nest. And so let's take that blindfold off and get you that number so that you know. The highest number that you should be going, unless you're having some big scaling initiative, is around 30-ish%. And of course, this is all industry specific. I work with, entrepreneurs mostly in the digital online space. They're selling digital products, masterminds, that sort of a thing. So I have a pretty strong hold on what are the industry standards, what's a good metric, what's a good KPI for cost of labor, whereas a restaurant would have a completely different metric.
Let me go put some numbers on that. So you're saying if I have a $300,000 company, so I'm bringing in $25,000 a month, and if I'm spending $10,000 on all the labor, including me, the owner, then that's fine because the 10,000 taken out of 25,000 is actually not, it's actually 40%, right? So you're saying that's like, whoa there,
Yeah.
that's not so good.
Yeah. A footnote there is generally the owner, we don't weave their salary, their officer wages into the cost of labor.
Okay, so if I take out my salary in that example,
Yep.
and so you're saying if I have, let's say, 10% of every dollar that comes in the door goes out to contractors or employees, that's actually a really good position. If you're saying like 40 cents out of every dollar that comes in the door goes out to contractors slash employees, that's where you're in the danger zone because you don't have enough money to sustain operations and pay the owners. Is that right?
Exactly. Exactly. So 30 cents out to your labor pool for every dollar you make is the high end.
Okay.
Whereas the example you gave, 10 cents in labor to every dollar you make. That is very, very good and very difficult to achieve depending on, what sort of labor your team is made up of. But somewhere around that 20-25% is really the sweet spot.
Great.
So that's what you want to aim for.
Great. Before we move on to the next one, everyone take a moment and think about what is your cost of labor. If you're driving, don't close your eyes. Everyone else, close your eyes. We're operating heavy machinery while listening to Redbeard Radio, which I love you for that. Just take a moment and think about the last month, whenever you're listening to this podcast, in the last month, what was your cost of labor? Was it either under 20? Was it more like 20 to 30%? Or was it like over 30%? And an easy way to do that is take your gross revenue last month, multiply it by 0.2. Was it less than that? If it's less than that, that's under 20%. You're a hero. If it's more than that, then maybe you should talk to Jen and try to figure out what's going on here. Now let's move on. You said the second one here was the cost of advertising. Let's briefly go through that one.
Yep. So advertising, generally I work with people who Facebook ads are their primary investment for lead generation, some YouTube ads, Instagram ads, that sort of a thing. But that's usually almost hand in hand with the cost of labor about what people are spending. About 25% of every dollar that comes in had a advertising cost attached to it. So for example, it takes 25 cents in a Facebook ad spend to generate $1 in your company. Does that make sense?
Yes. One of the interesting things, and it works for labor too, but with advertising is because, Jen, you have a sense, at least in the information space, of what a good target is, you can actually expose underinvestment.
Mm-hmm.
That if your goal is 20%-ish, and if someone's cost of advertising is 5%, well, that's a big red flag that you might be losing money by not upping your advertising spend.
Right.
And then you can talk with somebody about, okay, well, why are you spending only 5% on advertising? And where can you find the money in your budget to go maybe triple or quadruple your ad spend if you're seeing a good ROI or return on ad spend? So that's just a very interesting part of this that you can, it's both, it might be too high, but it also might be too low, and both are bad.
Yep. Yep. It's not cookie cutter. And this leads back into what we first talked about, was knowing your profit centers, knowing your profit margin for each one. So if you know that, level 1 of your product, the return on ad spend is a lot higher than level 2, and it's, let's say, 10 cents for every dollar you make, why wouldn't you throw more money into that? And so sometimes there can be a mindset challenge of, oh no, we're set on 20% in our budget. Well, if I can prove to you that your profit centers say You can double, triple, quadruple what you're doing by putting more money into your advertising. Why wouldn't you do that?
Now, this is so interesting because you have a CFO here, a fractional CFO, telling you spend more money on ads.
Yep.
And when you think about, oh, I should go maybe talk to an accountant. That's what a lot of us think of when we think of a CFO as like an accountant with superpowers. But here you have Jen saying, under certain circumstances, she's going to tell you double your ad spend.
Yep.
You're losing money. And that's just a fascinating aspect that I got to see you play with a mutual client on really helping them understand, really uncover areas of opportunity with their numbers.
Yep, absolutely. Some entrepreneurs I work with, and let's say they're spending $200,000 a month on Facebook ads. And to get them to that place, and they're like holding their breath and praying, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm spending $200,000 a month on ads. Now, they started at just spending $1,000 a month, right? And they worked their way up. But when they see the multiplication effect, if you know what your profit centers are doing and how they're performing,
Mm-hmm.
it makes it easier to lay out that $200,000 a month in Facebook advertising, for example, because you have data, you have a history on how that money is going to come back to you and in what fold, twofold, threefold, fourfold, fivefold, etc.
And you have someone monitoring the situation.
Absolutely.
I would liken it to heart surgery, which part of heart surgery is you go under anesthesia, right? Well, there is a highly trained, highly paid person right there who their only job is paying attention to your numbers while you're under anesthesia. They're not related to the heart surgeon. The heart surgeon's doing their own thing. But there's a person there who's paying a lot of attention. Now, if you just go in for heart surgery and you don't have someone paying attention to those numbers, keeping you alive, you might make it out.
Yeah.
But there's a person there for a reason,
Yep.
right?
Exactly.
And to get to that $200,000 of monthly ad spend, to do that without having someone who is not just trained in ad spend, but trained on the impact of that to your business, it's just critically important. Let's go talk about these other two ongoing expenses here. You have tech stack as your next one.
Yeah. So, really, the third biggest expense usually is the dues and subscriptions that, are required of running an online business for the most part. And so, I always like to look at how much are we spending every month as a percentage of the revenue to keep the business going. So this can be your CRM, it can be your QuickBooks Online subscription, it could be, Fathom, which is a data dashboard, all of those things. How much are you spending every month? And when we look at that as a percentage of your revenue, let's say, for example, it takes 50 cents in all of your tech stack investment every month to generate, for example, $5 in revenue. So that means you're spending 10% of your revenue on your tech stack. So you can see where I'm getting at this. If we go back cost of labor, I say keep it around 25, 30. If we go to advertising, let's say 20. You start adding that up, we're at 40 to 50% there. And then your tech stack costs you 10%. Then we're at 50 to 60%. That shows you what's left in the business, and you still haven't paid your other bills yet. So you start to see quickly what is left over to pay the remaining bills, like insurance and rent and all that sort of stuff.
Taxes.
I
hear those are important.
Yeah, they're very important. As well as to be able to take home, a healthy salary and distributions from your company.
So let's put a solid number on here. If you're a $250,000 a year business, that means $250,000 a year. That would allow you, if you're doing 10% cost of your tech stack, subscriptions, all that, that would allow you to spend $25,000 per year, or about $2,000 a month on all of your tech stuff in order to hit that 10%.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And that's part of why the Redbeard Accelerator is about $200 a month or $2,000 a year. So if you think of, let's say you're a $250,000 business and you have $2,000 a month is how much you can afford to spend on all your subscriptions and tech stack, including being part of this group membership community thing. Okay, $200, that eats 10% of your tech stack allocation for subscriptions. And you can see how, okay, well, yeah, if you have a $200 a month investment that generates many, many thousands per year, that's really, really healthy in the context of a $250,000 a year business.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's a fourth number on your list here. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
about that one.
So the fourth one, I'm not going to dive too much into this. This is something that if somebody has any questions, they can reach out because it's not necessarily black and white, but it's important. Your cost of goods sold, otherwise COGS, as they call it. And this is something I find a lot of entrepreneurs didn't know about until I met them. And then, like, these light bulbs went off in their heads, and it has really helped them to step into their role as founders and CEOs and creative operatives so much better. So, your COGS, your cost of goods sold, those are the costs that are directly tied to generating your revenue. So, that does not typically mean labor, but it can. That's why I don't want to confuse you with that. What it generally is your merchant fees, your PayPal fees to accept payments from your customers. It can be if you have inventory, if you sell actual physical products. It can be your fulfillment center expenses. It's important to really look at your cost of goods sold because that's typically the next big chunk of money that's coming out of your business every month. I don't want to get too much into that because that's like something that needs to happen more in a private conversation. So please feel free to reach out to me. My email is jen@jenbro.com. And we can talk about how all these things relate and go from there. So does that make sense, Brian, with the COGS?
That does.
Okay.
That's wonderful. And folks, this financial episode has already gone on a bit longer than normal. So I'm going to do the worst thing in the world, which is to tell you that numbers 4 and 5 of these top 5 numbers, you need to go contact Jen to go hear what they are. Number 4 is actually the most important one in the world, in my opinion, but we're not going to tell you what it is. You need to go take enough time to actually have a full conversation about it. So Jen, Jen at jenbro.com, JENBRO.com is the person to go contact so you can really discuss these in more depth. And Jen, thank you so much for sharing all this. Would you leave us with one single action that people can take today or they can put on their list of stuff to do soon to go help them make sure their business is financially healthy? What's your top thing?
That's a great question. It can mean different things to different people depending on where they're at. If you haven't done your taxes yet, get your taxes done.
That sounds important.
If your bookkeeping is behind, get your bookkeeping done or contact me. I can find somebody and put you in touch with somebody who is not going to get you behind in your bookkeeping and you can get up on your taxes properly. And I think really dive in and start to look at your cash runway. That is, I think, the thing that'll bring the most peace and clarity to most entrepreneurs.
And here's one thing with cash runway, folks. When you do those calculations once a month, write the number of months on a post-it note and put it somewhere in your office.
Yeah.
And then each month, replace the post-it note if it's changed.
Yep.
And that will just give you the sense of, okay, if it's 0, that's unfortunate. If it's, 12, then you're a rock star. And whatever the number is, it's okay. Your goal is to make the number bigger. And if you can do that, great. And if you don't have a path on how to do that, that's a problem that you need to maybe contact Jen or you need to maybe go get my book, The Impact Framework, at redbeardimpact.com and start to learn about some more systems you can deploy in your business. If your number is stuck at 1 and you can't figure out the numbers about like, how can you possibly make this number be 2 or 3 or 4 months? Then we need to talk about the viability of your business and what we can do with more systems to go and make your funnels better, deploy more stuff, everything else. Jen, thank you so much for being on the show. Everyone, it's jenbro.com is the place to go to learn more about and hear those other 2 numbers, number 4 and number 5, that are so important. Jen, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you. I had so much fun. I appreciate it.